Who's up at? Hey there. Good morning. Let me find myself. Make sure this is working right. I'm trying to switch this over to all my readings get to be on Little Red O Speaks, and then the other shows are going to be, well, I see it's showing up on this other one. Okay, that's fine. Well, there you go. It's really not what I wanted to happen, but that's okay. We'll worry about it later. Let me turn this up, make sure my music is not too loud. Because that's the music thing is a constant problem. I'm coming on a little early, haven't used my avatar. I've got a few things going on around here, and I don't want to miss the ward case studies as she shows us the Megan Boswell. Hey, wait, what? There you are, baby. How are you? Good to see you. Hey there. Good to see my friend right there. Wait, what? Yes, Megan Boswell, the ward case studies is going to bring us our sentencing today, and I didn't want to miss it, so I decided to just come a little bit earlier, So if the music's too loud, please let me know, because it's a constant problem. But if we don't run music behind our shows when we're using other materials, we can get a copyright strike. So there you go. Good morning. Well, let me say this before we get started. Lots of things going on out there in our baby Sebastian's case, and I don't know why all of these things have come out like this. I don't know why the FBI put that statement out there. I don't know who's doing what, but what I do know is it's just gotten old. Oh, my poor little baby dog's got the hiccups. Poor thing. Anyway, it's just, something has to break here. Something has to give. It is just ridiculous how far this has gotten, girl. I'm just so saddened by this next event. I don't know what's real and what's not real, sadly, because we've seen so many different things about that case. But the FBI coming out with that, wow, that's a little bit shocking, isn't it? It is to me. Now, the reason why I'm not, let me explain. I'm using my avatar today because I have not had a chance to get myself fully together, and we're just going to go this way. I'm moving stuff around in my house today, and we had to put down this new rug, which is just a lot of different things going on. So anyway, oh my gosh, there's a big truck out. Anyway, it doesn't matter what's out there. Anyway, so I'm just going to read chapters 9, 10, and maybe 11 from our new book. And she is so funny. It's called Sociopath. Her name is Patrick Gage. It's Gagene. She's a PhD, and she talks about her life from when she was a child and knowing that she was different. She just always knew it. She talks about all these events that happened in her life as a child, and then brings us forward to where she is today. Some of it is very trigger warning. Some of it is very funny, but overall, it's just really growing up, knowing you're different, getting your diagnosis, and then what do you do from there? So this is what she's discussing. Another thing I'm going to be talking about soon, once I get all the information, because okay, I don't know if y'all were watching this yesterday when somebody was talking about it, but they were talking about the new case with Lakin Snelling, and how she has this baby in the closet and then she just discards it. And I'm like, okay, does this fit? We did a little study about, shh, don't you bark. A little baby dog's trying to bark. No, about psychotic denial of pregnancy. This is a real issue, right? Don't you bark, buddy. Of course, he's going to bark. He sees this big truck out there. Anyway, just ignore him. So psychotic denial of pregnancy is a real issue. The thing is these ladies or these women, they know they're pregnant, right? They see that they're pregnant. Other people see that they're pregnant. But what happens is when this child arrives, they don't feel that mommy connection like maybe you or I would feel. They feel like it's some foreign body that just fell out of them, and they just don't really have that connection to this baby for whatever reason. Now, the one thing that we have learned about that is it really stems from an underlying undiagnosed mental health problem that is not noticed until this particular incident happens. So once I get more information about her, I'm going to talk about her. Looks like come on, Jack, quit. I'm sorry. He's just going to bark a little bit. There's nothing I can do about it. Anyway, we're going to talk about her, but I just want more information, because the one thing I don't want to do is give misinformation when it comes to cases like that. It's a very serious problem with these young kids. Look at Alexa Treviso. Now, Alexa Treviso, I looked at her as the same way. But the thing about Alexa Treviso is she carried around black bags in her purse, prepared for any day when she had this baby for to go ahead and dispose of it. That is exactly what she wanted to do. Why would you carry black bags in your purse if that's not what your intention was? Jack, shh. I'm sorry. I don't mean from the door. Anyway, so that's one of the other things we're going to be talking about soon. And now the Ward case studies and I are going to get together and we're going to talk about the Warno's case. Remember her? She was a serial killer. She had she came from just a really horrific background. And what I always want to know about these cases is what's in their mind. What happened to them? Were they born a sociopath? Were they a psychopath? What trauma led to what trauma in their life led to them becoming what they are? Because some of it is inherited and some of it is caused by some trauma response, right? So anyway, that's another thing we're going to start on. I think September the 10th, we're going to start on that one. Anyway, so let's start reading. I'm going to go ahead and start reading this right now. So I always say thank you for coming in. Stay as long as you can. Listen as long as you want. Enjoy if you want. Just enjoy it for what it is. I'm just reading about these people who do, who write these books, who are exactly what we're talking about. And she is the sociopath. So chapter 9, here we go. It's called Prescription. All right. A few months later, I finished my first year at UCLA. You should come home, my mother had urged over the phone. I wanted to, after all. I would have nowhere to live when the dorms closed for the summer, and it had to be a long time since I'd seen her or Harlow. But with the seriousness of my behavior at the front of my mind, I knew it wasn't a good idea. I need to learn more, I thought, so I can get myself under control. Instead, I decided to move in with my dad. His Coldwater Canyon Cape Cod style house was the most logical solution. With its tall white gates and sparkling backyard pool, I found peace there, safe inside my own secret fortress. At least I did at first. But just as it had shortly after I had arrived at school, my restlessness quickly returned. She just has a real problem, folks. I should get a job, I thought one afternoon, as I eyed the set of keys my neighbors had dropped next to their car, so I didn't wind up in jail. It wasn't the first time I'd considered it. Summer break stretched from June until September. A veritable workshop of idle hours, my devil side wanted nothing more than to get their hands on. These long months, with their lack of structure and responsibility, represented a cornucopia of potential disaster for someone like me. And I needed to set some guardrails. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. All right, wait, what? Go ahead. So she's very funny, but she's serious. She's a good writer. I really like her. Anyway. Although my meeting with Dr. Slack had been initially just disheartening, it resulted in an unexpected result. The day after the balcony incident, I returned to the library, but by that time, I stayed for hours, poring over every psychology book and research study I could find related to sociopathy. Days spent in the library after school turned into weeks as I marveled at the dearth of resources available to sociopaths. Much of the information I found was disappointing. Descriptions of the disorder were vague at best and misleading at worst. Mass media references rubber-stamped sociopaths as loathsome villains with few exceptions. Some even promoted sociopathic isolation, an argument I found to be particularly dangerous. These people should be avoided at all costs. One infuriating magazine article stated, "What are sociopaths supposed to go for help?" I wondered. These were human beings after all. They were people who desperately needed treatment. Yet most of the literature depicted them as monsters who should be banished. Pop culture, primarily based on sensationalized composites and secondhand stories, repeatedly describes sociopaths as evil, terrible people. They were said to have no conscience. They were said to have no soul. The books I found said sociopaths could be treated and couldn't be controlled. They were completely unpredictable, unemotional, and dangerous to society. The lack of self-awareness and the capacity for emotional development. But the data told a different story. Deep in the research racks, I found multiple studies indicating that all sociopaths were not, in fact, monsters hell-bent on destruction. Rather, they were people whose default temperament made them learn social emotions like empathy or remorse. They were just more difficult, but not impossible, to internalize. This made sense to me based on my own experience. Everything I had read indicated I was a sociopath. I was lacking in empathy, I was fluent in deceit, and I was capable of violence without remorse. Manipulation came easy. I was superficially charming and engaged in criminal behavior. I struggled with connecting to emotions. I never felt guilty, and yet I knew I wasn't the monster the media described. Oh. I also recognized that my symptoms didn't exactly match those of Cleckley's psychopathy checklist. Unreliability and failure to follow any life plan, number 4 and 16 on the list, were supposedly universally characteristics of sociopath personality. But they couldn't be applied to me. I was incredibly reliable when I wanted to be. I was a decent student, had been rigorously disciplined when it came to getting into UCLA. Yes, I was frequently untruthful and insincere, number 5. I also lacked empathy and could tell I wasn't working with a full emotional deck. But that was the point. I noticed these things. I was aware. I didn't experience any specific loss of insight, number 11. That meant I was not only capable, she is so funny. That meant that I was not only capable of self-awareness, but also of evolution. Other developmental milestones the literature said sociopaths couldn't experience. Something was wrong. From where I stood, the research was woefully inadequate. If everyone was using Cleckley's psychopathic checklist to diagnose sociopathy, then it could be only mean that important nuances were being overlooked. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I began spending nearly all my free time researching sociopathy in an attempt to better understand myself, to normalize myself. Eventually, the seeds of this self-normalization became more firmly planted as I came to realize, not just anecdotally, but empirically, that I wasn't wrong or bad, just different, like Jessica Rabbit. And nowhere was the distinction more important than in my understanding of love. According to the number 9 on Cleckley's list, sociopaths had incapacity for love, which was a tough pill to swallow. My lack of any meaningful relationship to date outside my family sadly seemed to indicate that this trait might apply to me. But when I started to really think about it, I know it couldn't be. What about David? Well, I just wondered. I remember that night I realized this and the flood of relief that followed. It was a few weeks before spring break. I'd been sitting in my dorm just reading a book about psychopaths when suddenly it struck me. David, I shouted. I slammed my hand down on the desk, startling Kimmy, who had just returned home from a shower. She stared at me. Now, Kimmy is her roommate, okay? If you remember from the other chapters, her and her roommate do not get along. Her roommate does not speak any English, which makes it a little hard, right? Okay. David, I said again. I jumped up and rushed to her, putting my hands on her still damp shoulders. David was my boyfriend, and we were in love, really in love. I was laying it on thick. The intensity of my outburst more than slightly exaggerated. I loved making Kimmy freak out. Something about it delighted me past the point of rational thought. That sounds nice, Kimmy said. In the months since our first meeting, my roommate had become better at communicating in English. To my disappointment, she had even stopped using the machine, insisting, as she put it on, full immersion whenever she was at the dorm. She still wasn't entirely comfortable with the language, of course, or with me, for that matter. Kimmy's eyes just darted back and forth, as if hoping to find something in the room to hit me over the head with. Meanwhile, I just cupped her face in my hands. Don't you understand what that means? I whispered. Psychopaths aren't capable of love, but I was in love once. That means I'm definitely not a psychopath. I paused for effect. It's a big deal. Kimmy swallowed hard and nodded. Well, that sounds nice, she said. And again, then she retreated into the back of her side of her closet, where she liked to go when she felt overwhelmed. And I'm sure that Patrick was overwhelming to a lot of people because she did not have feeling, because she could not understand how other people did have these feelings. That is the problem with these people. Well, not that they're all human and they all deserve love and attention and for us to treat them right, but they do have a mental deficit that we don't understand and they don't understand us. Okay. The realization filled me with hope. That I had once been in love with was evident I was capable of learning social emotions. The relationship may have been short-lived, but it happened. The emotions had been real. They still were. Despite the distance and time that had passed, my feelings for David had never diminished. I liked thinking about him. I liked talking to him. It made me feel normal, which is why I never lost touch with him. The first time I'd called, it was on a whim. a spontaneous chat a few months after summer camp, just to see what he'd been up to. I figured we'd only talk for a few minutes, but we didn't. That first phone call lasted hours. After that, we talked all the time. David was the only person in the world with whom I felt I could be simultaneously honest and safe. This for me, why is it doing that? Oh, please don't do that. All right, my computer's just trying to go in and out. I don't want that to happen today. Okay. So this for me was just a coveted dynamic. It reminded me of those early years in San Francisco when I'd sit under the table and happily confess my secrets to my mother. That type of safety had long been abandoned, traded, with good reason, for the protection afforded by deception. But what I gained is security. I lost it in companionship. It was isolating, and a part of me yearned to be seen, to experience safety through the lens of authenticity. That's why I love talking to David. I never lied to him. Guess what I said later that night? I'm not a psychopath. He just laughed. Are you sure about that? He said. Let me talk to Kimmy. Stop, I said. This is important. I told him, explaining my most recent revelation. Well, I'm confused. He admitted when I was done. If sociopaths and psychopaths are so different, why do they always get lumped together? And that's the question that we always ask, you know. We've seen this over and over, how the word is just misused and transposed, and people you think they're one thing, but they're actually something else. I mean, and what's sad about all of this is actually the realizing and learning that these people are really not diagnosed until they have a criminal record. That is just disturbing. Why do you need a criminal record to be getting the diagnosis? I mean, if you think there's something different about you, please go seek mental health. I had the exact same questions, and the answer I theorized after more trips to the library was once again because all the literature, the standard books on sociopathy and psychopathy weren't uniform in their distinctions. One book would claim that the two were the same. Another would say that they were different. There was no consistency. The field of psychology had a habit of just changing the names of mental disorders when they became tainted by slang appropriations. Terms like mental retardation, terrible name, we don't say that word, and multiple personality disorders, for example, were placed with intellectual disability and dissociative identity disorder. Okay, so remember Letitia Stouch over here trying to claim that was what was wrong with her? Hell no, Letitia Stouch. You didn't ever had dissociative identity disorder. You just killed because you're a killer. Sorry. Anyway, the problem is that updating terminology to fit times, which is well-intentioned, seriously complicated scientific research on the topics. The word sociopath was popularized in 1930 by the psychologist G.E. Partridge, who defined the disorder as a pathology involving the inability to conform behaviorally to prosocial standards. In other words, these are the people who don't act in ways beneficial to society and rather intentionally provoke discord. Subsequently, sociopathy was added to the first version of the DSM in 1952. With the publication and popularity of the fifth edition of Cluckley's The Mask of Sanity in 1976, however, the term psychopath became a catch-all for both disorders. But because there was no official changing of the guard concerning the name, research and clinicians just continued to use psychopath and sociopath interchangeably. This led to a great deal of disagreement in terms of diagnostic criteria and general understanding. I sat at my desk at my dad's house that summer, just reeling over statistics I'd uncovered after another visit to the library. Despite the confusion related to the name of this disorder, one thing researchers did seem to agree on was prevalence. According to several studies, sociopaths comprise nearly 5% of the population, about the same percentage of those who have panic disorder. It seemed crazy that a condition affecting millions wasn't given a greater attention by the psychological associations, particularly when the primary trait of a sociopathy is apathy. The primary consequence of unabated apathy is destructive behavior. What are all these people doing? I just wondered, to keep themselves in check. Yeah, she had a hard time with that. It was a question I desperately wanted to answer for myself. In the months since school ended, I've been struggling with new ways to offset my growing restlessness. With only so much time I could spend at the library, and without steady stream of fraternity parties and stolen cars to jolt myself into feelings, I had to resort to other methods of apathy reduction. Luckily, the City of Angels provided plenty of opportunities. I learned that breaking into houses was a lot like riding a bike. I hadn't done it since high school, but I found that it was still second nature. Wow, she's kind of dangerous, you know. Oh, my Lord. Okay. Oh, boy. Let me get back where I was. My dog just jumped through that little doggy door. Sometimes he's just so loud. He can't help himself. Anyway. So she had found that it was still second nature and still just as effective. Lounging in strangers' homes while they were at work, I was less restless. I felt relaxed. Without my mother's real estate lockboxes code, getting into houses it was just much trickier than it had been when I was a kid. I spent countless hours stalking residents to figure out exactly when they were routinely out of their house and for how long. I went to painstaking efforts to get inside properties without drawing attention to my access points. I became an expert at picking locks and assembled my own set of tools. She is so dangerous. I sat on Dad's living room couch one afternoon with an assortment of old padlocks and a tension wrench in my lap. I taught myself how to pick the locks years before, but had only recently began to practice the errors. The exercise was cathartic. In many ways, the manipulation of a lock was like the search for my own empathetic pressure valve. I liked working it out. I just have to find the right combination of behavior and distraction. I thought to myself as I worked on challenging old padlocks, and I can find equilibrium. I closed my eyes as I felt my way around the inside of the lock. Moving the hook around the cylinder, I pushed up against the pins. I could feel the tension wrench just getting slightly against my thumb. Almost there, I whispered. After a bit of gentle prodding, I felt the release of the final pin as I pushed it above the shear line. The lock made a satisfying pop as the shank snapped open. Gotcha! I opened my eyes and smiled at my handiwork. I wonder if I should be a locksmith, I thought. Then, for reasons I still can't explain, an even better idea popped into my head. I wonder if I should be a nanny. Working as a children's provider might have seemed like an odd choice for someone who had recently realized she was a sociopath. But children, our resident, weren't as likely to notice that I wasn't normal. They weren't as likely to out me for refusing to play by the rules. As long as I was fun and creative, kids would overlook my transgressions. Well, I thought it was an inspired way to keep myself occupied. Granted, I wasn't what anyone might consider a kid person, nor was I bubbly, expressive, affectionate, or any of the other things one might expect in a traditional nanny. Yet, surprisingly, I was hired almost immediately by a famous actor in the posh Los Angeles enclave of Brentwood. And perhaps more surprisingly, I loved the job. The 3 children I was in charge to manage, where they were quirky dispositions and charming temperaments, were like delightful interactive puzzles. I enjoyed getting to know their individual personalities. In my own way, I loved them. My intense feelings for those kids and instinct to protect them at all costs gave me an additional boost of hope. Maybe I wasn't such a lost cause after all. And the months passed and I settled comfortably into my job. My dark urges became easier to manage. With my free time limited, I had fewer opportunities to get in trouble. I knew that simply distracting myself was not a fail-safe measure against these destructive urges, but at the time, I was grateful for any help I could get. My internal climate was like a balloon. Things that kept me occupied, like school and work, were helium, lifting the balloon and pushing it above apathic baselines. But it wasn't permanent. The instant I was distracted by some responsibility or coasting off the after effects of bad behavior, I become listless. The balloon would lose its buoyancy, and before long, I would start looking for ways to jolt myself into a feeling. What I need is a trouble schedule, I thought. Well, it was my sophomore year, and I was sitting in my usual spot at the UCLA library during break between classes, just reading research materials. My latest find, a study of anxiety and the sociopathic personality. My latest find was a study in anxiety and the sociopathic personality in the Journal of Abnormal and Social Psychology. It had taken me weeks to track it down. It was written by Dr. David Lycan, a psychologist who claimed to have discovered a link between sociopathy and anxiety. After testing the anxiety levels of dozens of sociopathic subjects, he concluded that there was one subcategory of a sociopathy which is labeled as the secondary or neurotic. He later theorized, Oh boy, let me get back where I was. He later theorized this type of sociopathy may not be genetic, but was instead associated with stress caused by emotional frustration and an inner conflict. Struck stress. She always calls this struck stress when she feels this bellowing up, and she starts feeling the urge that she's got to do something to release this pressure. She's always called it stuck stress. So that's what she's talking about. It was something I remembered experiencing as early as elementary school, and claustrophobic type of anxiety that seemed to rise and fill in a lockstep with what I'd always called the pressure. And now finally, I had an inkling as to why. If this pressure is caused by the brain's subconscious desire to jolt itself out of apathy, I reasoned that the stuck stress must be an anxious reaction to apathy. It certainly made sense from my experience. Surrounded by normal people for most of my life, I was always working to conceal what made me abnormal. It was the only way I knew how to fly below the radar and keep myself safe. That's why at the first hint of rising apathy, I would start to get anxious. Knowing the pressure would ultimately force my hand that the only way to get rid of it was to do something bad, I would start to feel powerless. I would start to feel trapped. Unless I was alone, I realized with a start. Indeed, my reaction to apathy wasn't always discomfort. Often, I'd even enjoyed the experience, like the time I walked home from the slumber party or got inside that car, the hours spent at the abandoned house or near grandma's, the secret trips to the basement at the Rockefeller estate, and the late night drives in stolen cars. All of those times, I was consumed by apathy, and yet I wasn't bothered at all. Quite the contrary, I felt free. Because there was nobody watching me, I just concluded without the risk of having to justify my lack of emotion, I could just enjoy it. That was a revelation, and as I left the library that day, another realization sprang into my mind. I know that stuck stress is the result of my situational discomfort with apathy. Well, I thought, then why not be more proactive in neutralizing that discomfort? In other words, if my anxiety is triggered by my discomfort with apathy, it might be possible to minimize that anxiety and that destructive behavior that often resulted by learning how to accept apathy so it no longer made me uncomfortable. Well, the hypothesis made sense, even though I know I had a better understanding of what caused the pressure, as well as why there was so much stress associated with it. I still didn't know how to eliminate it, nor did I understand what circumstances I would or would not get anxious about being apathetic. Sometimes my apathy made me uncomfortable. Sometimes it didn't. But the bottom line was this. In order to remain an active, albeit secretly dysfunctional, member of society and continue to enjoy all the perks of membership, I would have to alter my anxious response. I would have to accept my apathetic nature instead of being apprehensive of it. The longer I allowed my apathy to build, the longer I waited to dole out my fix of feeling, the more likely I was to become anxious and the less likely I was to properly control my response. So why wait? I asked myself, wouldn't it make more sense to engage in smaller acts of bad, behavior more frequently? Well, then I surmised, then larger acts with less frequency? I decided to test my theory. Okay, she's going to do something bad again. When I got back to Dad's that night, I sat at my desk and attempted to log all the different types of bad things I'd done. Anything I could remember doing that I knew was wrong. I scribbled onto the page. When I was finished, I reviewed my list. These are all the things that minimize my apathy, I concluded, and these things keep me from doing something really awful. Attempting to be a researcher like Dr. Lycan, I just ranked them in terms of efficiency. I looked at the first item, physical violence. I picked up my pencil and drew a sharp line through the words. No matter how effective it may have been at reducing apathy, I already knew that violence was not something I ever wanted to consider. Besides, I reasoned that the point is to find something that isn't extreme. Next was stealing cars. Although fun, this also was too extreme. Plus, it involves other people. Well, I thought, in a very specific set of circumstances. I reluctantly scratched it off my list. What I needed was something more versatile. Something I could theoretically do at any time, in any place, for the rest of my life, if necessary. I moved to number 3, trespassing or stalking. I tapped the eraser against my chin and thought, I thought nodding I can work with. She thinks she can do that. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I poured myself some coffee and took a seat in the window bench in the living room. And I looked at the house across the street. The people who lived there, a youngish couple from Tanzania, were executives at Warner Brothers. They'd been married for a year and on a honeymoon in Cabo. I hadn't discovered this information accidentally. I'd acquired it by chatting them up during the 4th of July block party that summer. I also knew that they installed a state-of-the-art alarm system, but only activated it when they went on vacation. And they had a dog named Samson, who only looked mean. Most importantly, I knew they were always at the office by 8:15. Comfortable in my perch, I watched as they exited the front door and made their way to the matching SUVs parked in their driveway. After they left, right on schedule, I went to my bedroom, got dressed. 10 minutes later, I stood at their back door. The deadbolt was old but a familiar brand. I made quick work with it with my tools, and once I had it unlocked, I just stepped inside. When I crossed the threshold into the kitchen, I was momentarily hypnotized by the stillness. The silence of structure that had just been broken into is unlike any other. It's almost like the house can't believe what just happened and has gasped, taking all the air with it. There's this unimaginable tranquility. I could spend an eternity in that silence, completely absorbed in the present moment and entirely at peace. My moment was broken by the tap of canine paws just trotting down the hall. "Hey, buddy," I said, kneeling to give Samson a handful of dog treats. "Mind if I hang out here for a little bit?" Samson didn't mind. He clearly enjoyed the company. Together we wandered through the house. I scanned the knickknacks on the tables and the photos on the walls. I pursued the books on the shelves and studied the clothes in the closets. I took nothing. I disturbed nothing. I simply existed in a world where I was not supposed to exist. See, she talks about this her whole life, about just trying to fly under the radar and just trying to mimic other people, just to try to project other people's emotions back on them, because she does not know how to feel those emotions with her particular mental disorder, right? Because it is a mental disorder. Anyway, Samson whined and pushed against my legs when I tried to leave. I gave him one last squeeze, closed the door quietly behind me, and stepped into the backyard, just marveling at the change in atmosphere. Though I'd only been inside the house a half hour, everything around me felt just markedly different. The air was sweeter. The world was less hectic. I exhaled with relief and walked back to my house. As I'd hoped, the rest of the day continued without incident. There was no stuck stress. There was no emotional frustration or inner conflict. It was like I was completely a different person, a whole person, and not whose personality was at war with itself. After that, I knew I never wanted to wait for the pressure to become overwhelming before I did something to alleviate it again. Whether it was sneaking out of my window to follow my neighbor's home in the dark or methodically stealing cars from fraternity parties, I'd been haphazardly regulating my apathy with systematic destructive behaviors since at least middle school. But now I thought, I'm conscious of it. It made all the difference. I approached bad behavior like a discipline. I was responsible about it. I was about like it was my job, and my routine was strict. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, I sought daily dose of sociopathic stress relief, and then I went to school. After class, I'd walk to the library and spend as much time as I could reading books on psychology and research studies on sociopathy until it was time to go to work. And then I'd collect the kids from their schools and take them home. I helped them with their homework, ready them for dinner, and tuck them in bed before leaving at night. After I'd go home, eat my own dinner, and study until I fell asleep, then I would start over again the next morning. My apathy was like a dragon that needed feeding. If I ignored it, it consumed me. So I put it on a diet. I did exactly what I needed to give myself necessary jolts of feeling. I never took it any further. Even when I was tempted, which was often, I scheduled my mischief like I would have a doctor's prescription, and I never skipped a dose. Okay, now we're on chapter 10. It's called The Confession. See, I liken this to a person who is on illicit drugs or illegal drugs as self-medicating. So she's self-medicating to keep this under control and to make herself perceived to be normal in certain circumstances by doing all these other things that people don't know about, that she feels like relieves the pressure. So, when they always talk about people who say, well, when they take somebody's life or whatever, they felt some kind of feeling. I'm trying to remember what they said. Like dopamine, like it gave them a rush. They got a rush from it. So she's getting a rush from these feelings, which she's doing these bad things, which relieves whatever pressure that she calls this stuck stress that consumes her when she's in her own mind. I'm going to put it that when she's in her own mind, Confession, chapter 10. I maintained this routine for years, and the consistency worked wonders. Eventually, I grew confident that my theory had been correct. Smaller, habitual bad acts were a safer choice for relieving the pressure and abating my sociopathic anxiety than larger, more spontaneous ones. Premeditated transgressions were less likely to result in unintentionally revealing myself to the world and allowed me to adhere to my directive and not hurting anyone. I was a well-oiled machine of psychological and behavioral, however criminal, stability. Granted, I was stalking people on a semi-regular basis. I was still using unlawful entry as a treatment. But neither of these seemed harmful to me, quite the contrary. Regular doses kept my darker urges from escalating uncontrolled. As a result, I was able to thrive. I was on track to graduate. I'd accomplished a great deal in my research. I was a trusted nanny. I'd done exactly what I set out to do. I'd achieved some semblance of a normal life. Yes, despite my outward appearance as a responsible and well-adjusted, socially acceptable young adult, I still struggle with one problem I had since I was a kid, and I was alone. Being on what I considered the sociopathic spectrum often felt like a sentence to emotional solitary confinement. No one could relate to me. Nobody wanted to spend time with me. Not the real me, anyway. I was utterly alone, and loneliness, I'd come to realize, could be dangerous. My father had recently moved to his new place in Beverly Hills and let me stay in the house on Coldwater Canyon. For the first time in my life, I was entirely on my own. At first, I was thrilled. The complete lack of supervision and accountability was like a warm bath. After a few months, though, I noticed an uptick in my destructive compulsions. At first, it was just subtle. Savage fantasies which bring to my mind out of nowhere. As time passed, these got stronger, and I started to get concerned. It wasn't just because the compulsions were more intense, but because they were more distinct. For the first time in a long time, I felt specific urges of physical violence, usually toward complete strangers, just desperate to understand. I started keeping a record of the dates and the times when they arose. I soon noticed that they were most prevalent when I was alone for long periods. This was especially the case on weekends, when I would often go days without seeing anyone. None of it made sense. Being alone when I was typically felt just more at ease, the most free to be by myself. But after a string of uneventful weekends with no meaningful interactions with others, I realized I was more prone to violent fantasies after extended times alone by myself. That's a big difference between the loners, I thought, and the lonely. It was past midnight, and I was just heading home after a long day at work. I wondered if some part of me wants to get caught. Well, I thought as I pulled onto the freeway, or wants to be seen. As I drove, I considered the unique predicament being a sociopath presented. Were there millions of others like me just as conflicted about wanting to stay hidden? Was there any way to give them hope? Well, I wish I knew. I wish I had a giant megaphone to scream to them. Attention, all sociopaths and antisocial outliers. Don't panic. Don't hurt anyone. You aren't alone. You aren't crazy. It was the first time I'd ever considered addressing the problem of sociopathy outside of myself, and the experience was surreal. Cruising along in the car, thinking about the possibility of helping other sociopaths, I felt like I'd suddenly learned a new emotion without even trying. Indeed, hang on, my computer's trying to do this thing. Indeed, the idea of educating people like me just sounded interesting, even entertaining. I pulled off the freeway. Who says sociopaths can't empathize, I thought. My plan was to get online and do some research, but when I turned down my street, I spied my father's car parked in the driveway. I could see the television in the living room was on, and I hurried inside, grateful for the unexpected company. Dad, you don't live here anymore, remember? I joked. He smiled and said, what can I say? This place still feels more like home. He turned off the TV and gave me a hug. You're not just getting home from work, are you? Well, our embrace was brief as I wriggled away to get something to eat. I was starving. Yeah, I said, they had a premiere. Dad followed me into the kitchen and began rummaging through the pantry. Things okay at school? He asked, taking a seat at the island in the center of the kitchen. His tone seemed misplaced, and I got weary. Yeah, I said slowly. Well, that's good. He watched me for a second and then got to what I was already suspecting would be his point. You know, he began, I really don't like you working this late while you're in school. Inside the pantry, I rolled my eyes at the carefully arranged shelves of food. Well, I don't normally. I don't just mean tonight, he said with concerned look. You're up before dawn, and then you're off at work until late in the afternoon, sometimes late at night. When do you study? When do you sleep? We'd been through this before. I knew my father wasn't a fan of my decision to work while still in school. From his perspective, college was a time to cut loose and have fun. Attempting to keep these things light, I sidled up next to the island and grinned at him as I tore into my Charleston chew. Sleep is overrated, I said, but he would not be swayed. Be serious for a second, Patrick. Nobody values hard work more than I do. I just think it's admirable that you're a nanny, especially on top of all your classes. Well, thank you. But you're burning the candle at both ends. You need to slow down. Appreciate the college experience before it's gone. I bit my tongue, starting to get annoyed. You don't understand, I said. He reached across the counter and took my hand. Then do me a favor, sweetheart, he said. Make me understand. He squeezed my hand. You've been here for almost 4 years. What are your hobbies? Where are your friends? And then, what's going on, honey? In the dim light of the kitchen, he looked so calm, so rational. I wondered, what if I just told him the truth? In the dim, well, I guess he never noticed that she was different because he didn't spend enough time with her, huh? Because remember, her parents got divorced when she was young, and he stayed in San Francisco when they moved to Florida. So I think she was 10 or 11 years old and they got divorced. So he didn't really see a lot of the things that she had been doing that her mother was seeing and dealing with. But she's always been, I'm not going to say bad. She's just always had, she just always had desires to do little bad things to make herself feel something. Okay. But that's just part of her condition, you know. God, it was such a familiar temptation, one I'd struggled with my entire life. Even now, I still find myself oscillating between the security of deceit and the freedom of truth. The truth shall set you free. I'd heard that adage so many times, and every time I did, I longed for it to be true. But this rule, like so many others, didn't seem to apply to people like me. Truth didn't represent freedom for us. Quite the opposite. The only times in my life I'd ever been in trouble were when I told the truth. Lying is what kept me free. Yet, deceit, however effective at keeping me safe, was exhausting. I was a monotonous combination of counterfeit personality traits and falsified storylines, and I was sick of juggling. It was one of the reasons I'd become so isolated. It was easier to be alone than to constantly put on a show. Well, maybe instead of working so hard to be invisible, I thought, I should just see what it's like outside the shadows. I'd always been honest with David, and I'd never once regretted it. I never once felt unsafe. I looked at my dad. His kind blue eyes reminded me of the Pacific. I'll tell you what's going on, I said, surprising us both with my candor. But you're not going to like it. He squeezed my hand. Again, well, try me. Well, I nodded. I took a deep breath and started talking. I disclosed everything about my apathy and my destructive urges. I divulged things I did, both as a child and as an adult, and I was just trying to manage my impulses. I detailed my struggles at school and my conversations with Dr. Slack. Then I described my research and the reasoning behind wanting to stay so busy. It's why I need the job, I told him. Because I can't have too much free time. I can't be bored. It's tough to explain. But when I'm bored, it's like I remember that I don't feel. And that feeling, the feeling of not feeling, makes me want to do bad things. I just shrugged slightly, sometimes anyway. Dad listened in silence, staring at the marble counter. Then he looked up. Jesus, Patrick, he whispered. He paused, just uncomfortable. I always wondered, when you were younger, your mother and I were always thought, and then he trailed off. I might grow up to be a serial killer? He looked sad and embarrassed. Not exactly. I smiled, attempting to put him at ease. Dad, I was joking. And anyway, it's fine. Fine that my daughter thinks sociopathic? How is that fine? I shook my head and took the last bite of my candy bar. Because being a sociopath doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean what anybody thinks it means, really. And I stood up. Look at me. You'd never think I'd do the things I do. I'm a responsible student with a full-time job taking care of little children. For God's sake. Who steals cars and breaks into houses? Right. See my point about free time? I returned to the pantry. Honey, he said, this is not sustainable. What about finding a therapist? Didn't you hear what I said? No therapist is going to help me. Sociopathy isn't even in the DSM. Well, it might help talk about your feelings. What feelings? I replied. Don't be ridiculous, Patrick, he said. I know you have feelings. I returned up to the island, another Charleston chew in my hand. Yes, you're right, I said, taking a seat. Of course I have feelings. You just have to understand my feelings aren't the same as other people's. Explain to me, then, he said, just finally, how does it feel when you feel? Well, I thought about it, trying to just find a reliable metaphor. Well, you know, what's like I said, it's like having a bad eyesight. I can see most stuff, but there's some things I have to squint to read. It's the same with emotion. Happiness or anger, those are clear. They come naturally. Other ones don't. Things like empathy and remorse. I can connect them if I really try, but it doesn't happen on its own. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. I just frowned. I really have to squint. Dad nodded solemnly. And these urges you have, and he responded, when does that happen? Well, whenever I go too long without feeling something, I replied. The things I do are like a medication. I break into houses or I steal a car, and then the pressure just goes away. I fluttered my hand like a butterfly. It's a behavioral prescription. And have you ever hurt anyone? He asked softly. Well, not since middle school, but you wanted to. I sighed. Sort of. It's not that I want to as much as I feel like I have to. And I shrugged. But like I said, those urges are rare. They only come up when I felt nothing for too long, or if I spend too much time alone. What counts as too much time? He pressed. You mean like weekends? What happens then? Unprepared for the questions, I shrugged again and began to toy with lazy Susan on the counter. Well, I just keep busy. In recent months, I've come up with what I consider to be a harmless and effective way to fill the time and avoid isolation during the weekends. In addition to keeping me distracted, this activity actually helped a great deal in keeping the pressure at bay. But I knew my father wasn't going to appreciate it. Honey, Dad nudged, what do you do on the weekends? Well, I go to church, I said. That wasn't the full truth, but I wasn't sure how honest I was prepared to be on such short notice. I didn't know you were going to church, he said. Well, I could tell he was excited about the idea. Dad was raised as a Southern Baptist in Mississippi and had never been able to fully resist the pull of the cloth. Which one are you going to? Well, I'd love to go with you if you don't mind. I rocked my head from side to side. I mean, I wouldn't mind, but I don't think you'd like it. I hesitated. They aren't normal church services. What do you mean? And she goes, they're funerals. She's funny. She is funny. Okay. She's going to funerals on the weekends to keep herself busy. That's just too funny. It had started a few months before. A friend of Dad's had died, and he asked me to meet him at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park for the service. I hadn't expected much. I'd only met the friend a few times, and I figured the ceremony would mostly be pomp and just circumstance. I couldn't have been more wrong. When we walked into the chapel, I was struck by the sound of a woman weeping, not just crying, but howling, nearly hysterical with grief. It was the wife. As we took our seats, I could see her bent over one of the pews, her body shaking. This is just funny. It's funny, but it's not funny, seriously. Oh, my. Oh. Not just crying, but howling, nearly hysterical with grief. It was the wife. As we took our seats, I could see her bent over one of the pews. Her body was shaking. I'd never seen such a display of raw emotion, and I was captivated. I looked around, wondering how others were reacting. I realized everyone else in the chapel was affected too. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Certainly, I had witnessed my fair share of emotional expression, but this was something different. I was surrounded. Everywhere I looked, people were clocked in emotion. Some were just over it in their reactions. Others were subdued, but everyone was feeling something. It was like they were all connected by some invisible emotional string. And then the strangest thing happened. My apathy started to dissipate. I couldn't believe it. It was the same way I felt after I broke into a house or stole a car, except I hadn't done either. Let me see what time it is. The sensation was a combination of acute awareness and utter relaxation. I wasn't feeling per se, but I was not feeling either. It was like I was floating, coasting off the energy of the people around me. When the service concluded, I walked with Dad to the gravesite as if I was in a trance. Never in my life had I been surrounded by so much heightened emotion, and the effect was transformative. It was as though I was escaping apathy through osmosis. I couldn't get enough. I was like an emotional vampire. Are all funerals like this? I just wondered. I had to find out. After my father left, I wandered back into the chapel where another service was beginning. I took a spot in the back row and sat quietly and waited. The next ceremony was notably different. The deceased was an elderly woman who had suffered a long-time illness. The mourners, though numerous, were just composed. Nobody appeared to overcome with sadness, and only a few people were visibly crying. But the energy inside the room was the same as it had been at the first funeral. If anything, it was even more powerful. After that, I was just hooked. Nearly every weekend, I began attending what I thought was a strange service. My preferred location was Forest Lawn, but eventually I expanded my territory to include cemeteries all over Los Angeles. My favorite were the services that took place at night. Though rare, these were typically the most emotionally charged, not to mention atmospherically evocative. I scanned the papers in the church and cemetery websites, then planned the entire weekend around evening funerals. I did my best to convey my enthusiasm to my father. I'm telling you, I said, nighttime funerals are a totally separate deal. I wish I knew who was responsible for setting them up. Like I wish I could meet these people before they died. I bet they were amazing. No joke. You should come with me sometime. Dad stared at me horrified. Patrick, he said after a beat, this isn't right. Going to funerals. I snorted. Give me a break. Hear me out. Dad said. I started to protest. You might not be taking anything tangible from these people, but make no mistake, you're stealing. You're using their pain for your own gain. That's wrong, honey. It's not against the law, I argued. I mean, I know stealing material things is, but who says going to a stranger's funeral is wrong? Honey, no, he said. He was just exasperated. Something doesn't have to be illegal to be wrong. You know that. Oh, I know, I said. I just don't care. I tried to think of how to explain it. You say it's wrong because it feels wrong to you. Yes, said Dad, because you're exploiting someone else's pain. Right, I said. So what you're saying essentially is that you wouldn't do it because you wouldn't like the way it would make you feel. He considered this and reluctantly agreed. Yes, he said. See, I said, that's what I'm trying to tell you. I don't have that feeling, that shame. So there's literally nothing internally or externally to stop me from doing it. Going doesn't make me feel anything. If anything, it makes me feel okay about the fact that I don't feel anything. It helps me accept not feeling. And that acceptance, I think, is what keeps me a sociopathic anxiety at bay. I smiled, expecting him to be impressed with my reasoning. It's not like I'm being disruptive or disrespectful or anything. He sighed, steadying himself. Well, one could argue that your very presence is disrespectful. Look, I said, I can't help that. I don't feel things like normal people, but I have to choose the lesser of two evils. These funerals, for example, I explained. Oh, good, it is there. Hang on a minute. It helps me accept not feeling, and that acceptance, I think, is what keeps my sociopathic anxiety at bay. I smiled, expecting him to be impressed with my reasoning. It's not like I'm being disruptive or disrespectful or anything. He sighed, steadying himself. Well, one could argue that your very presence is the disrespectful part. Look, I said, I can't help that I don't feel things like normal people, but I have to choose the lesser of two evils. These funerals, for example, I explained. I understand these people around me are sad. I get that, but it helps me. So when I go, I'm very respectful. I don't know how else to explain it. It's sort of like my way of keeping things organized. It's why I bring flowers. Dad blinked. He says, what? Oh, my God. So she's going to strange people's funerals, preferably the nighttime ones, and she brings flowers to these funerals. Oh, my goodness. I mean, unless the family requests donations, then I just write a check. My father shook his head, unable to process what he was hearing. You write checks to the families of the people's funerals you crash? Well, usually it's some sort of charity, but yes, I took a sip of water and stared at him. It's the same thing with the cars I take. If I see they're out of gas, I fill them up. And the house too. One time someone left the stove on, so I turned it off. It's my way of trying to balance the karma. Dad just buried his face in his hands. So what are you saying, Patrick? He asked, his voice just muffled. That you're some sort of sociopathic Buddhist? Oh my God, that's so funny. She just makes me laugh. My eyes widened, and I was just enchanted by the idea. Yeah, he struggled to maintain his composure. I was kidding. Oh, honey, he continued, dropping his head. This is crazy. What if somebody wants to know who you are at these funerals? Has that ever occurred to you, that someone might want to know who that tall blonde sitting alone at the back of the church might be? Trust me, Dad, nobody ever pays attention to me, which is fine because I'm not there to interact with anyone. He shook his head. Then why go in the first place if you don't like interacting with people? I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. It's so hard to explain, I said, because I don't relate to other people the way you do, the way most people do. I don't care about the things normal people care about. I don't like interacting with people because they don't connect to me, and I can't connect to them. I took a deep breath, but just because I can't connect doesn't mean I don't wish I could. I shook my head just sadly. I didn't choose this, I said helplessly. I didn't decide to be someone who doesn't feel the same way as everybody else. And I think I'm just getting better at accepting it, but it still sucks. I'm isolated. Physically, socially, emotionally, all of it. I just exhaled angrily. Everything about me is a fucking contradiction. Dad looked sad. Oh, honey, he said. I gazed at the floor, my thoughts just disappearing into the Mexican tiles. You know what the worst part is? The worst part about being a sociopath, I said, it's the loneliness. You would think so. You wouldn't think so, but it is. I want friends. I want to connect, but I can't. It's like I'm starving, but food makes me sick. Dad didn't say anything, and I could tell he was trying to remember something. Hey, he offered after a long silence. What about David? Aren't you still friends? Well, just hearing his name made me smile. Yes, I said. Dad was right. David was my friend, and a close one at that. Hardly a month went by that my high school sweetheart and I didn't talk on the phone. We'd even hung out occasionally at holiday parties or random events over the years, usually when I flew home to visit Mom in Harlem. But despite our undeniable bond, that relationship felt intangible to me, just long distance. I wished I was a kid. I wasn't a kid anymore, and neither was David. You had feelings for him, right? Well, I shrugged weakly. Yes, I said, but David doesn't live here, Dad. He's got his own life 3,000 miles away, his own normal life. That's what I want, my own normal life. You know, relatively speaking. Dad leaned against the island and a curious expression on his face. So let's talk about it, he said. Talk about what? You graduate in a few months, he said. What do you want to do? Well, I thought the enormity of that question just exhausted me. Jesus, Dad, I said, I have no idea. Well, he says, can I make a suggestion? Can I stop you? Well, I think you should come to work for me. Dad had frequently worked with one of the largest talent management firms in the industry. He had recently decided that he wanted to open his own company and had pitched it to an ideal, helping him start it a few times. I'd never taken him seriously. I looked at him as if he was crazy. Work for you? To do what? Well, you can be a music manager. Oh, I can? I shook my head laughing. What idiot would hire me to be their manager? I would. I smirked and tilted my head. Daddy, I said, touched by his offer to help. I love you, but that's crazy. Haven't you been listening? I'm a sociopath, for God's sake. Says you, Dad responded. I still want you to talk to a therapist about it. In fact, I insist. Fine, I just relented, but I don't need you to give me a job to keep me out of trouble. I'm not, Dad said. I've been thinking about it for months. You've got a great instinct when it comes to music, Patrick. And besides, he looked around, what else are you doing? You want to be a nanny for the rest of your life? My eyes fell once again on that lazy Susan. I tugged at the bowl that rested on it and admired the perfectly symmetrical tower of apples just that sat on the inside. I'd bought the apples at the weekend farmer's market. I'd bought the apples at the weekend farmer's market. When I got home, it had taken me an hour to get them exactly the way I wanted them, sort of like playing Tetris. For me, it was an excellent use of my time, like meditating, Just looking at them gave me a tremendous sense of detached peace and satisfaction. So, Dad pressed, what do you think? I stood and pushed away from the counter. Well, I think I'm exhausted. I have a ton of stuff I need to do for class. I want to spend as much time as I can at the libraries before graduation. I shrugged. I'll need some time to think about it. Dad grabbed an apple, shifting the bowl and skewing the arrangement. My once symmetrical fruit installation now needed serious reconstruction. He smiled and bit into the crisp Granny Smith, a loud crunch sending shivers down my spine. You have 2 weeks, he said. Then he kissed me on the cheek and left. She is something else. Let me get this marker over here. Okay, so now we're on chapter 11, and this is the last chapter we're going to read today because I'm going to run out of time. I hope y'all are all enjoying this, and when you get a chance to listen to it, it's quite fascinating coming from her. She's just writing about herself, and it's funny. It's not funny. I mean, she's brutally honest about it, and I appreciate that in her writing. So it's called Borderline, chapter 11. Just off Mulholland Drive, on the way to my father's house in Beverly Hills, it's a cottage. Unlike the many mansions that line that fabled thoroughfare, this home is small and antiquated. On a visit to Dad's, I had slowed down to catch a glimpse of the little old woman who was almost always outside tending to her rose garden. She was rarely alone. An old man I assumed was her husband usually sat in the lawn chair nearby, just watching her work while he read. He balanced a coffee cup on a collection of books stacked in the grass next to him. I'm going to buy that house someday, I murmured. It was several months later, and I was sitting in an office at San Vincent Boulevard. The afternoon sun had started to dip below the horizon, and if I angled my head just right, I could just make out the curve of the ocean through the window. You're changing the subject again, Patrick. Dr. Carlin says, at my father's insistence, I'd finally started seeing a therapist. Dr. Carlin was a psychologist who came highly recommended. After telling her my history and stories about my bouts of apathy and destructive behavior, she too suspected that I suffered from sociopathic personality disorder. So she asked to administer the psychopathy checklist, the PCL test. I squinted out the window. That's because your subjects are so annoying, I said. I think it's a good idea, she prodded gently. My gaze emptied into space, and my thoughts returned to the cottage. We sat in silence for a few seconds before I turned back to her. I just don't understand, I said, shaking my head. Why do you want to give me this PCL? I'm not a psychopath. Diagnostically, I'm inclined to agree, said Dr. Carlin, shifting in her chair. But even though the PCL was designed to assess psychopathy, many researchers use it to test sociopathy, off-label, so to speak. She added, there's an official separate diagnosis for sociopathy. Okay, I said cautiously. So how does that work? Well, even though you're essentially it's the same disorder, many clinicians, myself included, believe sociopathy is something of a milder form of psychopathy. The maximum score on the PCL is 40, she explained to the therapist. Now, hang on, y'all. Anyway. And, okay, so it's a 40. The maximum score is 40, explained the therapist, and psychopathy is indicated by a score of 30 or higher, but sociopathy is generally assumed to be registered between 22 or more. Generally assumed. Well, again, this test is technically structured to assess for psychopathy, and there's a lot of disagreement about how to diagnose those who fall at the low end or just below the psychopathy cutoff. So what do normal people score? Well, I just had to ask. Well, it varies, said Dr. Carlin, but I think the consensus is around 4. My jaw dropped. 4? I leaned back in my seat. So let me get this straight, I said. If you're a psychopath, your score is 30 or higher. But if you're a normal person, your score is a 4? Dr. Carlin's eyes just widened slightly, and I laughed. I'm sorry, I continued, but that's insane. You're telling me there's no clinical diagnosis for people who score between 4 and 30. What about someone who scores a 15 or 21? You're telling me that the PCL doesn't say anything about them? Well, like I said, we think sociopaths score between 22 and 29. The therapist just clarified. And to be fair, normal persons would never take the PCL. It's meant for criminal offenders. Recorded criminal history is required. Okay, so she doesn't have a recorded criminal history. And this is what she's always been upset about this. And she talks about this. She has We watched part of her live on, I don't remember one of our lives, we watched part of her show talking about this. And she's always been upset that they have to be a criminal before you get this test, right? And I agree with her. I think anybody who thinks they have a problem should be tested before they become the criminal, not after they become the criminal. Then can you give it to me, I asked. Well, Dr. Carlin explained, because I'm going to use the PCL-SV. It's similar, but it's designated to be used in clinical settings. So there are two versions of the same test. I asked one for criminals and one for everyone else. Dr. Carlin nodded. Both tests use the same criteria. They look for symptoms across 4 categories: interpersonal styles, deficient emotional experiences, impulsive behavior, and antisocial conduct. The difference is the PCL-SV doesn't require a criminal record, so it can be used on anyone. Christ, I muttered. Why is all this so complicated? I shook my head. And what's the point of testing if you can't officially diagnose a sociopath? What do you mean? There's no treatment for sociopathy, correct? Not correctly. No, not currently. I threw up my hands. So what are sociopaths supposed to do with their diagnosis? Smoke it? The doctor shifted anxiously. Well, psychopathic and sociopathic diagnosis are primarily used by clinicians. She paused. To gauge propensity for criminality. I laughed. In other words, this test is only used to see how likely it is that someone might commit future crimes. I just wonder if old Letitia Stouch, I call her Lucretia Talento, aka Shitslinger, I wonder if she got the PCL test or the PCL-SV test. I'd like to know if that's in her medical records over at the prison, because I think she had a huge propensity for further criminality. Anyway, more or less. Well, then let me save us both some time, because I'd say my propensity for criminality is sitting as strong 100%. Dr. Carlin simply said, well, let's find out. The PCL-SV interview was exhausting. For hours, I sat across from the therapist, and we talked about everything from my criminal impulses to my sleep patterns to my sexual history. Then I had to wait an entire week until our next appointment to get the results. That following Tuesday, I was early for our session. Well, how did I do? I blurted out. Well, Dr. Carlin closed the door and calmly took a seat. Well, she said, after getting settled, I thought maybe we'd talk about the test itself first. You seemed pretty tired afterward. How was that experience for you? Oh, come on, I responded. What did the test say? Instead of answering, she asked, why is that so important to you? I tilted my head forward. Why are the results of the test that will confirm my sociopathic diagnosis important to me? I asked incredulously. Well, yes. Well, I excelled. I don't know. I said, thinking about it for the first time. I guess it would be just be nice to have an answer once and for all. And at the very least, I think it'd be easier for me to explain to people that I'm a sociopath. That'd be a lot less confusion. That's for sure. Dr. Carlin was intrigued. You tell other people about your diagnosis, she asked. Why? I shrugged. So I wouldn't have to pretend to be normal after all. People pick up on stuff. They have since I was a kid. I think coming clean right off the bat would just head off a lot of questions. It would definitely make my life easier, that's for sure. It seems odd, Dr. Carlin observed. Then you would care what other people think. Well, that's the thing, I told her. I don't care what people think. Well, I've never cared. I do have survival instincts, though. Some need to stay hidden to keep people from finding out who I really am. That way I could keep acting out without getting caught, without being revealed. But now I don't care about being found out. I accept who I am. I paused, and then she added, well, I've tried it too anyway. Dr. Carlin looked pleasantly surprised. She says. I was starting to lose my patience. Great, I said. Now that that's settled, can we get to the test, please? The therapist held open her hands in a reluctant agreement. She goes, okay. She said, looking down at her notes, well, if you remember, the test covered 4 clusters. Your scores indicate an above average range of psychopathic symptoms across all 4. Dr. Carlin frowned. It's interesting, though, she continued, because your interpersonal style doesn't consistently correlate with the PCL criteria. Acknowledging that my befuddled expression, Dr. Carlin explained. According to the PCL, psychopaths and sociopaths all demonstrate a very specific type of social aggression. I describe it as pushy salesman symptoms. That's a lot of overt arrogance and antagonism. She just continued. It's the primary way sociopaths establish social dominance. It's how they assert control. You're saying I'm not like that? I asked. No, you are, Dr. Collin replied. But the way you establish dominance is through manipulation and charm, which makes sense because you're a woman. Then she added, a female sociopath isn't necessarily going to use the same interpersonal techniques that a male one will. It's one of the problems I have with the PCL, actually. The therapist said, I felt like there's a lot of gender bias. So what does that mean? It means that the place where your score is lowest, relatively speaking, is specifically on that interpersonal style scale. Then she replied, but it still is elevated. Everything, in fact, is elevated across the board. As I suspected, the levels aren't high enough to put you in the extreme psychopathy category, but they definitely indicate sociopathic personality disorder. At first, I didn't say anything. I just shifted my gaze out the window. On the opposite side of St. Vincent was the park. A group of people entered the gates and began leisurely walking across the grass. It was to yoga class or a field trip or something. There was a couple of dozen of them. 1 in 25, I mused. Patrick, said Dr. Carlin, talk to me. I turned back to her while Nat, okay, remember in the book, that first book that we read, that was The Sociopath Next Door, and explained 1 in 25 people were actually sociopaths. So like 1 in 25 children in a classroom is a sociopath, right? Anyway, I turned back to her while tapping a finger on the glass. Did you know that? I asked. Roughly 1 in 25 people is a sociopath. That's what the research says. I looked again at the people in the park. So do you think there's another sociopath at the park, or is it just me in this sample? I glanced back at Dr. Carlin, who had cocked an eyebrow at me. I'm serious, I said. She considered this and said, it sounds to me like you're wondering if you're alone. And then she paused. What does that feel like? I looked down, slowly shaking my head as I thought of what it says. It feels like something I know. I said, it doesn't feel like something I feel. And is that your normal reaction, she asked? When you think about your relation to other people? I shrugged, yeah. And she furrowed her brow as she glanced again at her notes. What about the guy in Florida? You said you'd experienced feelings for him. David, I asked, just surprised. Yeah, I love David, or I loved him. I bit my lip. I don't really know. What do you mean? I thought about it. Well, it just seems silly at this point. I mean, we dated when we were 14, and since then, I've never felt the same way about anyone. That seems unbelievable to me. I've been starting to think it was all just something I made up. I shook my head sadly, like I wanted to feel love, but actually didn't. Dr. Carlin nodded slowly. And how does that make you feel? Well, number 15 on Complexities list sprung to my mind. Sex life, interpersonal, trivial, and poorly integrated. This poor lady. It's a bummer, I said. Thinking about the boyfriends I'd had, number 15 on Complexities list sprung to mind. Though I guess it would make sense, right? I continued, I'm not good at connecting to people or to myself. I'm a sociopath. I paused for a second, listening to the word as the words left my mouth. It seemed different now. True, said Dr. Carlin, looking me in the eye, but you know what I find interesting? I shook my head. She set her paperwork to the side and leaned forward. In spite of your difficulty connecting with others, your first impulse after being told your diagnosis was to look out the window to find someone else like you. She allowed her words to settle. Now, why do you think that's the case? I looked out the window again. By this time, the group of people had crossed the park and was out of view. I was disappointed that I could no longer see them. Well, I don't know, I said softly. I guess it would be nice to meet someone like me. I mean, to not have to explain why I feel or don't feel, to not constantly have to justify my actions or try to speak in emotional language I don't understand. I think it would be nice to just feel normal around someone. That's what I said. I can't explain it. I feel like I met someone like me, then I'd feel like my voice just trailed off. I don't know. No, Dr. Carlin pushed gently. Finish the sentence, and then you will feel. What? Hope, I said, exasperated, though that doesn't make much sense. Dr. Carlin leaned back. I disagree, she said. I think it makes a lot of sense. It means you're looking for someone with whom you can relate, and that's good. Between your curiosity about our sociopaths and your willingness to share your experiences, I'd say that's a lot of hope for you. I snorted at that, though. Then I turned away from the window and gave her a sarcastic grin. Hope for what? A sociopathic friend? I rolled my eyes. Lucky me. You're not looking for a friend, she said. Then what am I looking for? Dr. Carlin cocked her head and a small but confident smile on her lips. Empathy, she said. My therapist's observation that I was an empathy-seeking sociopath was insightful, if not entirely surprising. In many ways, I was like that lost duckling in that children's book, Are You My Mother? Except instead of a brave little bird with a kind heart and identity issues in search of his mommy, I was an antisocial outlier with a limited emotional range and a habit of lying in search of a buddy. Despite my diagnosis, I wasn't any closer to figuring out why I was the way I was. Now that I had much time to think about it, after a brief post-graduation respite, I accepted my father's offers and joined him in his new company. Shadowing him and several of his associates for those first few months on the job, I made it a mission to learn every aspect of the music management. And what I discovered was surprising. The music industry, I quickly realized, was a sleight of the hand mechanism for which I was perfectly suited. Distracted by the allure of the music and carefully crafted mystique of the artist, few paid much attention to the shadowy figures lurking behind the scenes. Yet this was where the real magic was taking place, the dark magic. From backroom payola deals to side hustling A&R scouts to shadowy producer agreements and double-dipping management firms, the music business was a cruel and shallow money-making trench, a long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free. At least Hunter S. Thompson seemed to think so. It was hard to argue. From the moment I started working as a talent manager, my psychological horizons began to expand. Suddenly, I no longer felt like the only sociopath in the world. Not only did most of the people I met appear to embrace my personality type, many seemed prone to co-opt it. Indeed, I was shocked by the number of people I encountered in the entertainment business who, after hearing about the diagnosis, professed a similar disposition. Oh, I'm not totally a sociopath, said Nathan. I'm a music producer shortly after we met. I don't give a fuck about anything. One look at his production contract indicated this wasn't entirely accurate. Nathan seemed to care a lot when it came to royalties, so much so that any artist signed to his production company had to surrender almost all of their creative ownership. But that probably explains why I'm so good at my job. I like to do bad things, he added, with a sly grin. I like being a sociopath. Before diving into the music industry, I'd always struggled to find people just willing to accept the type of person I am, much less admit to having similar personality type. But now I was surrounded. The effect was hypnotizing and initially blinding. So enthralled with the prospect of like-minded company, I gave zero thought to credence of the sociopathic self-diagnosis of my so-called cohort. Let me reread that, okay? So enthralled with the prospect like-minded company, I gave zero thought to the credence of the sociopathic self-diagnosis of my so-called cohorts. Like a dehydrated traveler, I simply guzzled every last drop. Well, at least I did it first. And then I met Jennifer. Uh-oh, here comes problems. Jennifer was a record label executive tasked with handling the sophomore album release of one of my father's most lucrative clients. Because Dad wanted to make sure the new record was successful, he encouraged us to meet. The rock world is nothing like the pop world. She explained to me one night. It was a year after I'd started working as a manager, and we were having drinks at Costa Vega, my favorite Mexican restaurant in the valley. You've got to be tough to survive, she added, especially if you're a girl. I smiled and stepped quickly into the opening that she had unwillingly provided. Well, that's perfect for me because I'm a sociopath. She just grinned, thinking I was joking, but then listened closely as I gave her a brief explanation of my history and my diagnosis. Whoa, she said when I finished. That's amazing. She lowered her voice and leaned in conspiratorially. To be honest, I've always sort of wondered if I was a sociopath. Huh, I replied. I've been having that a lot lately. No, but you know what I mean, Jennifer pressed. Things that make other people cry don't make me cry at all. Like true crime stuff. I'm obsessed with it. She looked around again, and I have totally fantasized about killing people. I shook my head. Well, that's wanting to kill someone doesn't automatically mean you're a sociopath, I said. That's sort of a misconception. Sociopathy is actually way misunderstood. No, but you know what I mean. Jennifer cutting me off. I love dark stuff, like vampires, she smiled. It's probably why I get into marketing for rock bands. I was starting to wonder if she should revisit my policy about revealing my personality type, but I'd hardly had the time to consider it before she rested a hand on my forearm. I get you, girl, she said, just nodding. I glanced down at Jennifer's hand and saw her baby finger was wrapped in a surgical bandage. Well, what happened there? I asked, happy to change the subject. Jennifer pulled her hand away. Oh, she said, I rescued this dog, a pit bull, the sweetest thing, but last month she started a fight with my other dog. When I tried to separate them, she bit my finger off. Oh, that's gruesome admission. It made me choke on my cocktail. Well, I coughed and took a deep sigh. Well, I'm sorry, I said. She bit your finger off. Jennifer nodded. Yeah, my neighbor had to drive me to the emergency room. Luckily, the doctor was able to sew it back on. And then she smiled. Do you have any doggies? Well, I was speechless. No, I don't. Hold on a second, I said, trying to get my bearings. What happened to your other dog, I asked. Jennifer grimaced. Well, yeah, that's an ongoing issue. Ladies only aggressive with other dogs, so I have to keep them separated at all the time. She paused to signal our waiter for another drink. Doggies are the best, especially now that I'm divorced. Did you know I'm divorced? I shook my head. Jennifer didn't seem to notice. I was married for 10 years, and all I have to show for it is this shiny, shitty little house in the valley. Oh, my. Next time, I want someone to take care of me, like a rich guy. Jennifer drained the rest of her margarita. That's why I have now a rich guy. His name's Joel, and he's so rich. Her eyes widened. He knows other rich guys too, We could set you up, and we could go on double dates. I'm sure that our friend here Patrick is not liking this conversation. I shook my head. I'm not really. He's got this huge place in Beverly Hills in the flats. She just interrupted wistfully. I feel like that's where I should live too, Her expressions darkened briefly as she stared off into space and then added, I deserve it. I was confused, not knowing what else to do. I started modeling her behavior. I put on my most sympathetic expression and rested my hand against her forearm, careful not to disturb her reattached finger. I get you, girl, I said. But I didn't get her. And the more I got to know her, the more confused I became. Like many of the self-diagnostic confessions I'd been hearing from people in the entertainment industry, Jennifer's speculation that she was a sociopath almost made sense. She regularly complained about feeling empty. She was frequently impulsive, and her behavior, like mine, was often destructive. She was also highly insensitive, demonstrating either empathy or indifference to other people's boundaries. But this, I quickly discovered, was where the similarity stopped. Whereas I suffered from lack of feeling, Jennifer seemed to have a surplus. For starters, she had a terrible mood swings. She would switch from euphoria to agitation for no apparent reason. She also had a terrible temper and limited self-control, just frequently storming out of meetings or screaming at the staff members when she didn't get what she wanted. But perhaps most different from me, Jennifer seemed to be highly erratic. This was particularly true when it came to her romantic relationships. Even the slightest perceived rejection would send her into a cognitive descent, just a meltdown. She sounds borderline, Dr. Carlin surmised. I was at the therapist's office for our weekly session. Curious about Jennifer's personality type and its similarities to mine, I'd asked for her take. Borderline personality disorder is often confused with sociopathy. She explained because of the behavioral diagnostics are similar, the observational stuff, unstable relationships, impulsivity, self-destructiveness, habitual emptiness, anger, hostility, and many of those traits overlap. Same with narcissism, actually. But why is that the case, I asked? If we were so different, because your behavior is motivated by different things, says Dr. Carlin, borderlines act out due to abundance of feelings. Sociopaths act out because of the deficit. Can y'all hear my little dog snoring? He's laying behind me sleeping as I read, and he's snoring. He's cute little Frenchie, but they can snore pretty loud. So just try to ignore it. I'm so sorry. But why is this the case, I asked, if we're so different? Because your behavior is motivated by different things, said Dr. Carlin. Borderlines act out due to an abundance of feeling. Sociopaths act out because of deficits. It's all about attachment. She continued after a beat. People who suffer from borderline personality disorder are desperate for love. It's why they tend to be hyper-emotional. They will go to any length to avoid loss of affection, even if it means disrespecting boundaries or engaging in destructive behavior. They don't care about anyone else's needs or feelings. All that matters to them are their needs and their feelings. Other people are perceived as self-objects. In other words, borderlines don't view others as separate individuals, but as an extension of themselves. The perception of the word is therefore purely egocentric and one-dimensional. Sociopaths, on the other hand, are not motivated by attachment. Dr. Collin continued, if anything, their view of the world is shaped by a lack of attachment. But that worldview is similarly egocentric and one-dimensional. It's why people always get them confused. The more I paid attention, the more I agreed. On the surface, Jennifer was a lot like me. Her emotions, although far bombastic than mine, were fairly limited. She appeared incapable of empathy and immune to shame. She was frequently dishonest. Her behavior seemed to vacillate between extreme periods of good and bad, and her attachments to other people were not symbiotic, but based on self-interest. So why wasn't I relieved? Given my psychological isolation, I should have been happy to have met someone moderately similar, even if our specific diagnoses were different. After all, Jennifer was certainly happy to have me. I'm so glad we've met. I felt like you're my soul twin. She just texted several days after our initial meeting at Casa Vega. Now that's a little strange, right? But those kind of people get attached easily. We've heard about this before. But the feeling wasn't mutual. I loathed Jennifer. Her excessive emotion made me uneasy. While there was a method to my madness, she struck me as unhinged. Her turbulent behavior was ruled only by whatever self-serving sensation was rearing its ugly head. She reminds me of Sid. I thought with disgust, as if sociopaths don't have a bad reputation already. We've got people like Jennifer making things worse. Jennifer was no sociopath. She was worse. A knockoff, a sheep in wolf's clothing. It made me angry. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I found myself thinking about Jennifer all the time, and not just casual ruminations, but specific fantasies of violence against her. And I liked it. It was almost soothing to have a fixed point on which focus my attention. Even though, thanks to my, hang on a minute, I lost my little place right there. I got to get ready to turn my page here. She goes, I found myself thinking about Jennifer all the time, and not just casual ruminations, but specific fantasies of violence against her. And I liked it. It was almost soothing to have a fixed point on which I focused my attention. Even though, thanks to my prescription, it had been a few years since I'd felt any serious rise in pressure. I was always looking for opportunity to feel. Working as a manager, trying to be good, going therapy, even meeting up with friends for drinks, all these things were normal on the surface. All of it was healthy in theory. However, the reality of my situation remained the same. No matter what was happening outside, my internal climate was always at risk of stagnating. Fortunately, once I met Jennifer, I no longer had to worry. Hating her not only helped me keep my apathy in check, but it's just funny. She's just funny. Let me say that again. Hating her not only helped me to keep my apathy in check, but my behavior as well. Treat, Jennifer shouted. I've got to talk to you. It was the morning of the album release, a month after our first meeting at Casa Vega, and I had just arrived at the radio station where she had arranged a live interview with our band. Stepping out of my car, my shoulders slumped at the sight of her waiting for me in the parking lot. Ugh, I thought. I could see she was agitated and disheveled. Why haven't you returned my call? She asked frantically, just gasping for breath as she trotted across the lot. Something really bad happened, and I need to talk to you, Jennifer insisted. Well, I shook my head. No chance. The interview is in 10 minutes. You don't understand. It's important. Jennifer put her hand on my arm and gently pulled me close. You know my dog, Lady? Fighting impatiently. I looked to see the lead singer entering the lobby of the radio station. Are you serious? I'm not listening to a dog story right now. She killed my neighbor's dog. I was shocked. What? You know, I have to keep her away from other dogs, right? So I've been putting her in the backyard. Well, my neighbor kept their dog in the backyard. Anyway, Lady must have dug under the fence or something because she got a hold of their dog and killed it. I saw the whole thing happen. Now it was my turn to grab her arm. Jennifer's elbow made a satisfying pop as I yanked her out of my client's line of sight. You watched your dog dig under a fence, attack another dog, and kill it? I just demanded. She nodded. Why, I asked. Why didn't you stop her? Why didn't you do something? In response, she weakly presented her recently reattached finger. Oh, you got to be fucking kidding me. I sniffed, generally disgusted. What did your neighbor say? That's the thing, Jennifer said, her voice rising in panic. After the lady was, done, I panicked. I knew I had to hide the body. So I took it out of the street and left it there. They'll think it was their fault that it got out, right? They'll think it was their fault that it got out. Then they'll think it got hit by a car. What, I exclaimed? What the fuck is wrong with you? I had no choice. Jennifer shrieked, starting to cry. She took me to the hospital last time. She knows lady's aggressive. If she finds out, she'll make me put her down. Oh my God, I said, when I made the connection. This is the same neighbor who drove you to the emergency room. What the fuck is wrong with you? I ask again. I told you, Jennifer insisted, I'm a sociopath. You're not a sociopath. I said, just furious. You're a fucking moron. She sobbed and just wails were attracting attention in the parking lot. Oh my God, what if I get caught? She moaned again. I feel so bad. She sputtered between tears. Grabbing my wrist, she pleaded with me, Patrick, you have to help me. You have to help me. Tell me what to do. I wrestled myself from her grasp. You want my advice? I just hissed. Go home, get yourself cleaned up, and stop spitting out. I'll handle the fucking interview on my own. That seemed to snap her out of her hysteria. Yes, she said, sniffling, you're right. I should just take a deep breath and be kind to myself. She made an exaggerated display of inhaling and exhaling, and then said, I'm going to go home, though. Why not? She goes, I'm not going home, though. Why not? I asked immediately, just regretting the question. The guy I'm seeing, Joel, he said, I'm just going to go to his house. I deserve some retail therapy after this week I've had. I actively resisted the urge to stab her with my keys. My nails were sharp and they pierced the flesh of my palms. Fine, I said, evenly. I don't care. Just get it together. I turned for the station, but Jennifer wasn't done. Patrick, can I ask you something? The tears and hysteria were gone now. I spun around. What? So Joel gave me one of his cars to drive, right? It's nice. It's a Porsche. But he didn't give me his credit card or anything. I sort of felt like that was just dickish. She paused. That was dickish, right? She asked again. Like we've been seeing each other for a while now, and I'm at his place all the time. I feel like he should have offered me his credit card to go shopping. I took a moment to fully appreciate my hatred. Totally, I said. And finally, then I headed into the station. I made it in time for the interview, and after dispatching the DJ booth, I took a seat in the listening area. The room was fortunately empty, and as I stared into space. I'm sorry to say this over, okay? The room was fortunately empty, and as I stared into space, I could feel apathy, blissfully, start to rise. But I couldn't zone it out for too long. Something was bugging me, and feeling of discomfort. I glanced down at my hand. My palms were bleeding. Okay, we're going to stop right there. That was the end of number 11. We'll start on number 12. Probably on Monday. I have to do it on Monday because I don't go live during the weekends because of my husband. I think I just like to spend my time with him and my son. So anyway, I'll see you all on Monday. We'll get back to this. The next chapter is called chapter 12. It's called Sociopath. So that sounds interesting, a sociopath. I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, I'll see you later. Have a good day. I'm fixing to go over to the ward case studies and listen to her as we talk about the sentencing of the next, who is it? Bosch, I think. Oh, let me get my phone. Yes, let's see. Who is going to be sentenced today? Let's see. It's the ward case studies. Let me go find it. It's going to be good. Hang on, guys. I just want to be able to send y'all over there. If you have not seen her, you need to go see her. I like listening to her. She's just really good at this. She's just really good at it. Okay. So the Megan Boswell sentencing, it's coming up soon. So if you have not had a chance, go over there and check her out. If you have had a chance, just a reminder that the Megan Boswell sentencing is upcoming. It is scheduled for in 15 minutes. So in 15 minutes, I hope to see you all over there. Have a good afternoon. I'll see you Monday, and we'll start back on our book. Bye, guys.